Demons Smell Like Lavender. Written by Magpie Quill. 11 children stood in line with their backs pressed against the blood-stained wall of the basement. A faint floral scent lingered in the air. Father loaded his old battered shotgun and glanced behind him to make sure the door was locked. I began to walk down the line slowly, looking at the children one by one. I knew each of their names. More than that, they were my friends. Everyone in the Winterfeld foster home. During the day, we picked tomatoes in the yard and sat by the canal running by the street. Father spent much of the day cooking, and we all ate at the great table in the dining room. It was only sometimes that I had to do this. Only sometimes. When it smelled like lavender. I paused in front of Ava, took a half step closer to her, and inhaled. She stood like a statue, keeping her expression neutral, despite the beads of sweat trickling down her neck. Some of the kids, like Ava, knew that I hated when they were afraid of me. Nothing could be done about the rest. They kept their distance, and I didn't try to talk to them. I walked past Ava, and she let out a small breath of relief. I took careful steps forward. The flowery scent thickened, the scent that only I could smell. Finally, I stopped in front of Skylar. Skylar was Ava's brother, and one of the children who were afraid of me. He never spoke to me, and avoided me at every turn, giving me a wide berth every time we passed each other in the hallways of the foster home. He called me a freak under his breath, and I could practically see his hair stand on end whenever I stood remotely close to him or his sister. He stood stiffly as I sniffed his shirt, and then his skin. I paced to the right and left of him, smelling the air and the kids next to him, all eyes on me. When I raised my hand to point at him, he cracked a nervous smile. "Hey," he muttered, his voice shaking slightly. "Hey, you're kidding, right?" The smell was coming from him, I was sure. I stepped aside, and Father raised a shotgun. Ava and a couple of the others squeezed their eyes shut. Before he could even scream, Skylar was a splatter of red brains on the wall. The echoes of the shot whined softly in my ears. Natalie, the newest kid, burst into terrified sobs. Father put his shotgun back in the closet and conscripted Julian and Cass to help him burn the body. Ava and I were instructed to go out and search the twilight streets. Part of me was happy to be walking beside Ava, but part of me was sad to see the dread shadowing her eyes. It was cruel to have made her watch her brother get blown to bloody shreds, a sight that could very well haunt her for a long, long time. "It wasn't really him," she said quietly. "Was it? Just something that looked like him." I nodded. I thought about talking to Ava about it as we walked, but decided against it. I loved Ava, just as much as Ava loved lavender. In fact, I only knew what lavender smelled like because of her. There was a giant herb garden full of it, a little ways down the canal, owned by some rich family. One day in the summer, Ava had snuck into the garden and brought back an armful of the sweet purple blossoms, and I had almost killed her, because she smelled just like the demon that haunted our home. Ever since that day, Father forbade bringing lavender into the house. It was one of the many rules he had for us, alongside things like no talking to neighbors, no calling the police, and always come home for dinner. "You kids okay?" Someone called from a car that slowed by the footpath. "Where are your parents?" Ava and I ignored him, because that was the rule. It was dusk when we found Skylar in a ditch by the canal. He sat on the dusty concrete and slowly swayed back and forth, holding his leg that looked like it was broken. There was no scent to him, other than the faint odor of sweat and dirt. Human smells. Ava ran up to him and threw her arms around him. "I saw our mom," he muttered, pointing a trembling finger out at nothing. "She waved at me from over there." Neither Ava nor I had the heart to remind him that his mother was gone, that he'd only been tricked by the demon that wore her face. We propped him up between our shoulders, and I wrapped my arm around his ribs, as close to him as I'd ever been. His whole body shuddered with revulsion, but he didn't resist. He probably didn't have the strength to. By the time we had shuffled our way back home, Father had burned the thing that had pretended to be Skylar, and buried its ashes in the yard. He wrapped up Skylar's broken leg, and laid him in his bed. As the night deepened, Skylar's eyes grew clear, bit by bit. "It got me," he murmured. "Oh God." "You're safe now," Ava said carefully. He looked at her, and looked at me sitting beside her. He shuddered, and began to turn to me with eyes full of disdain. But the movement pulled at something in his leg, and he cried out in pain. I reached out instinctively, but he shrank away. Don't touch me, he cried. The boys in the room looked at him, half concerned and half fearful. "He can make it better," Ava said softly. "Right, Caleb? Please?" I nodded. Skylar clenched his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut, swallowing his tears. I placed my hand on his broken leg. The coolness of my palm sank into his skin, and slowly, the broken muscles began to relax. Skylar took a shaky breath. "You killed the demon," he muttered. "Right?" "Yeah." "What did it look like when it came here? Did it look like—" I nodded. "It looked like you. Warrior face." Skylar shuddered. He clenched and unclenched his fists, like he felt sick in his own skin. "Put me to sleep," he said. "Huh?" "You heard me. I saw you do it before to the others. Use your freaky half-demon powers, and take me away from today." Ava winced. "Skylar, just... please." I stared down at him, his pale face, the pain in his eyes. "Okay," I said quietly. I placed my hand on his forehead. His eyes slid shut, and his face went slack. "Good night." In the morning, I opened the back door and walked out into the yard. Skylar was standing by the old cedar tree, leaning on a pair of homemade crutches and staring down at the patch of dirt where Father buried the ashes of the demon last night. I approached him carefully. "Morning," he muttered. "Not going to school today?" "I've got a broken leg. Your dad said I should rest." I nodded. We stood in silence for a long time, just staring down at the dirt. "You're really creepy," Skylar said finally. "You know that?" I bit my lip. "All the demonic shit you do freaks me out. The weird way you stare into our eyes. And the smelling. What are you smelling for?" "Lavender," I said absently. "Huh?" "Lavender," I repeated, a little sheepishly. "The demon smells like lavender." Skylar stared at me strangely, though I was used to that. "Is that why you told your dad to shoot Ava that one night?" I nodded, then averted my eyes. "It was a mistake," I said. "Once I got close enough. She smelled like a human." "Weirdo," Skylar muttered under his breath. I didn't say anything. "You like her, don't you?" Immediately, I felt my cheeks flush. I quickly looked back up at Skylar. His mouth twitched into a pained half-smile. "I knew it." "You did?" Skylar let out a huff of laughter, a sound I wasn't used to hearing. "Try acting a little less creepy," he said. "Maybe then you'll have a chance, half-demon kid." On Wednesday, I awakened in the middle of the night, awash in chills. The air was filled with the sweet scent of lavender that the autumn breeze swept into my room. I looked around at the boys' bedroom, at the 6 kids sound asleep in their beds. Then I looked outside the window. In the moonlit yard, underneath the old cedar tree, the dirt was slowly shifting. I watched as a vague shadowy shape clawed its way out of the ground. Terribly deformed and barely humanoid in figure, it slowly pulled its body from the dirt and stood up on gangly limbs. I couldn't see its face, but thought I could feel it looking at me. I took in a small breath. "I protect the humans in this house," I whispered. "Be gone." It trembled as if it could hear me through the breeze, just like I could smell it from the second-story window. I watched it slink away into the night before I pulled my covers over myself and went back to sleep. The next day, at dinner time, I caught the scent of lavender in the air. Father herded us into the basement and took out a shotgun, and I walked down the line of kids until I stopped before Grace. "No," she begged. "Caleb, I swear it's not me." Her voice was so convincing that I felt a pang in my chest, but I knew the demon could take on any face and name, and I was used to swallowing my doubts. The only way to confirm the demon's presence was to smell it. That smell of lavender. I raised my finger to point at Grace, and with a swift shot and an otherworldly scream, her brains were splattered onto the wall. Late into the evening, Julian found the real Grace lost in the dusky downtown streets, frantically running through swerving traffic and screaming for her dead mother to come back. Father buried the ashes of the demon deep. He always did, but it always came back weeks later, days later, sometimes even the next day. On Sunday, Jake smelled like lavender. Father shot him in the head and burned his body, and Ava found the real Jake perched on the railing of the bridge over the canal and dangling his feet over the water, humming a lullaby that he claimed his long-dead father taught him just a few hours ago. A couple weeks after that, it was Natalie. Shot, burned, buried. Skylar found her sitting in the Old Town Cemetery, clothes tangled in the brambles by her mother's grave. We tried not to think about the demon, whenever we could, while Jake anguished over the fading words of the lullaby, and Natalie bandaged the scratches all over her arms and legs. Skylar and I spent our late afternoons by the canal, skipping stones, and wishing the sun would never go down. "You should tell her," Skylar said. "Huh?" He skipped a stone halfway across the water, and watched the ripples fade into the waves. "Ava," he said. "You still like her, right?" I quickly flushed, realizing what he meant. "You know where she goes, every day after school? She goes to that herb garden. She looks at the flowers, and never touches them, because she doesn't want to bring the scent home and confuse you. She's afraid I'll try to kill her again," I said quietly. "Nah, she isn't afraid of you. I can tell." "You can?" "Yeah." He tossed another stone and grinned. "She's a weirdo, just like you." The demon was beginning to hate me. I could tell. I woke up in the middle of the night again, the air filled with lavender and malice that burned through the walls. I peered outside the window to see the demon pulling itself out of the dirt, shaking clumps of soil from its misshapen head and clawing at the ground with its skeletal hands. It moved with a new kind of vigor, and once it had emerged into the pale moonlight, it turned its twisted face up to my window and locked its carnivorous eyes with me. For a moment, we stared at each other. Its eyes were cold and dark, and filled with the kind of hatred that made my hair stand on end. Then it trembled and slipped away into the night. The next evening, when the kids came home from school, someone smelled like lavender. In the basement, I sniffed out Julian, and Father raised the barrel of his gun at him. This time, the demon didn't beg. It didn't make any effort to pretend to be Julian. It grinned so wide that the edges of its false human mouth split, and its eyes filled with a burning fury as they settled on my face. "You," it hissed, in the twisted mockery of Julian's voice. "You were meant to be one of us, wretched thing, siding with humans." The blast of the shotgun cut him off, and his brain splattered onto the wall. The kids were looking at me. I shuffled my feet, and the flecks of blood on the floor. "I protect my friends," I muttered quietly. "You can keep coming back, but I'll never stop." It was Saturday afternoon when Skylar came up to me in the yard, a crooked smile on his face. "Good job, half-demon. You finally done it." "Done it?" "Ava wants to see you," he said. My heartbeat quickened. "Really? Why?" "Oh, come on." Skylar jumped up and struck a dramatic pose. "I protect my friends. You can keep coming back, but I'll never stop." I felt my ears turn red. "That was cool. You're a heroic creep." I didn't mean to." "Own it. You did good." I smiled. "She's waiting for you at the picnic table in the rich guy's garden. Try not to kill her this time, yeah?" Ava was indeed waiting for me in the herb garden. As I climbed over the white fence and stepped inside, I smelled all sorts of smells, from rosemary to mint to scents I didn't even have names for. I saw in the distance the flowering beds of lavender, and then I smelled them on the breeze, a familiar sweet scent that instinctively raised the hairs on the back of my neck. It was a strange thought that the dreaded smell was coming from the harmless flowers. I walked over to the beds and plucked a stalk of purple blossoms, then sat down next to Ava. "I thought lavender was forbidden," she said. "It's okay," I said quickly. I know they're your favorite. You can have it." I handed her the stalk, and she smiled, and tucked it behind her ear, so the purple flower pecked out from her hair. "I need to tell you something, Caleb." My heart skipped in my chest. "What is it?" "You're very brave," she said. "And I know some people are scared of you, with how you were born, and what happened to your mom, and how close you are to the world of these demons. But I think you're human, just like us. Because only humans can love, you know?" I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled gratefully and nodded. Ava plucked a flower from her lavender stalk and pushed it into my hair. "Without you, the demon would have replaced one of us long ago," she said, nestled in, and started feeding. It could have consumed Skylar, or Julian, or Natalie. Her palm pressed onto my forehead, and I felt a heavy, unnatural drowsiness seep into my brain. "That's why I hate you," she whispered. It smelled like lavender, and lavender, and lavender. A wave of dread clawed its way up my chest, but it was quickly overcome by the cold lethargy. Ava's voice twisted as the creature wearing her face began to laugh. I will show you what hatred feels like, half-human. Now go to sleep. In despair. Hey! My eyes snapped open. What are you doing in my garden? The sharply dressed man said. This is private property. The sun sat low on the horizon. Blades of grass and bits of dirt stuck to the side of my face. Slowly, I felt my blood turn to ice. Cat got your tongue, young man? I scrambled to my feet and bolted. I leaped over the garden fence and sprinted up the path by the canal until the second-story roof of the Winterfeld foster home came into view over the hill. I ran up to the front door and slammed it open. The house was silent and dark. The dining room in the back was empty. The air was thick with the scent of lavender. Choking on my mounting dread, I ran down the stairs to the basement and fumbled with the rusted door handle. It was locked. I clenched my teeth, and a burning sensation raced down my arm. With a sharp twist and the sound of splintering wood, the door handle came off, lock and all. Just as I swung open the door and screamed stop, a deafening shotgun blast shook the walls. There wasn't a sound in the basement to follow the echoes of the shot. Ava slid to the floor, her head painted on the back wall. 10 children stood in line with her. My father stood by the door, with smoke coming out of the barrel of his shotgun, and a single figure stood in the middle. Its finger lifted to point out where Ava had been standing. It turned its head, grinning wide with my eyes, in my nose, in my mouth. Too late. All eyes turned to me, and then to the thing that was now wearing my face, and then back to me. Father's hands trembled. No, Skylar said softly. No, Ava. She's dead, the demon said. Your mortal love is gone, half-human. The choking feeling clawed up my throat. Natalie began to cry. Skylar fell to his knees in a puddle of his sister's blood. Leave these humans, the demon hissed, or suffer with them at my hands. Skylar sobbed his sister's name. Natalie wailed. The other kids looked at me with terrified faces, streaked with tears. The lavender blossom slipped out of my hair. It fell to the floor without a sound, just like Ava had. My vision clouded up. My limbs grew stiff, and the choking feeling seemed to pour out of my mouth as I screamed. The scent of lavender filled my lungs. The last thing I remembered before the world turned white was the sensation of the floor splitting open under my feet, and the screech of the demon as it was dragged deep, deep into the earth. Get up, freak! I slowly turned my head, sending needles of pain through my brain and down my spine. Skylar looked down at me, ashen-faced with dark bags under his eyes. Did you get some sleep? I wanted to ask him the same question, but my throat felt like it had been shredded from the inside out whenever I tried to talk. I just nodded and accepted the bowl of porridge he set down by my bed. You bled onto the pillow, Skylar said, in a tone that was neither particularly concerned nor particularly disgusted. Give me that. He shuffled the bloodied pillowcase off my pillow and carried it out of the room. His leg had healed to the point where he was only limping slightly, but I knew his worst wounds lay elsewhere now. In the evening, I walked down to the dining room to see my friends. None of them smelled like lavender, and everyone kept their distance. Father went down to the basement after dinner to replace the broken lock and floorboards. I went out to the yard, where I found Skylar sitting by the flower bed where we'd buried Ava. No sign of the demon, he muttered as I approached, right? I mouthed yet, though I wasn't sure if Skylar understood. It's been a week. It's too early to get our hopes up, is it? I nodded. I don't think it's coming back, he said anyway. You didn't see what you did. I saw. The floor opened up, but it wasn't dirt and stone, just this cold, empty blackness that spelled out death. Is that why everyone's afraid of me now? I wanted to ask. Why nobody wants to talk to me anymore? They'll get it, Skylar said vaguely. Someday they will. We sat by the flower bed until the sun went down, and the night sky deepened. When the air began to grow cold, Skylar stood up and pulled me to my feet. Cold isn't good for the throat, he said. Let's get inside. Now that was a fun story. Remember to smell your friends, and shoot them if they smell weird. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And hey, how about you hit that notification bell? I haven't been saying that one yet, have I?